After reading this section, students should be able to describe the characteristics of protists, describe 4 ways that protists get food, describe 3 ways that protists reproduce.
Protists. Some are so tiny that they cannot be seen without a microscope. Others grow many meters long. Some are poisonous, and some provide food for people. What are they? The organisms described above are protists. A protist is a member of the kingdom Protista. Protists differ from other living things in many ways. General characteristics. Protists are very diverse and have few traits in common. Most protists are single-celled organisms, but some are made of many cells, and others live in colonies. Some protists produce their own food, and some eat other organisms or decaying matter. Some protists can control their own movement, and others cannot. However, protists do share a few characteristics. For example, all protists are eukaryotic, eukaryotic, which means that their cells each have a nucleus. Members of the kingdom Protista are related more by how they differ from members of other kingdoms than by how they are similar to other protists. Protists are less complex than other eukaryotic organisms are. For example, unlike fungi, plants, and animals, protists do not have specialized tissues. Because protists are so diverse, some scientists think that kingdom Protista should be broken up into several kingdoms. Scientists are still revising the classification of protists.
Some general characteristics of Protista are: most are single-celled organisms. All protists are eukaryotic, far less complex than other eukaryotic organisms. They lack specialized tissues.
Protists and food. Protists get food in many ways. Some protists can make their own food. Other protists eat other organisms, parts or products of other organisms, or the remains of other organisms. Some protists use more than one method of getting food. Producing food. Some protists are producers, like green plants. These protists make their own food. Protist producers have special structures called chloroplasts, chloroplasts, in their cells. These structures capture energy from the sun. Protists use this energy to produce food in a process called photosynthesis, photosynthesis. Plants use this same process to make their own food. Finding food. Some protists must get food from their environment. These protists are heterotrophs, heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are organisms that cannot make their own food. These organisms eat other organisms, parts or products of other organisms, or the remains of other organisms. Many protist heterotrophs eat small living organisms, such as bacteria, yeast, or other protists. The way that these heterotrophs get food is similar to how many animals get food. Some protist heterotrophs are decomposers. Decomposers get energy by breaking down dead organic matter. Some protists get energy in more than one way. For example, slime molds get energy by engulfing both small organisms and particles of organic matter. Some protist heterotrophs are parasites. A parasite invades another organism to get the nutrients that it needs. An organism that a parasite invades is called a host. Parasites cause harm to their host. Parasitic protists may invade fungi, plants, or animals. During the mid-1800s, a parasitic protist wiped out most of the potatoes in Ireland. Without potatoes to eat, many people died of starvation. Today, people know how to protect crops from many such protists.
Protists get their food 4 ways. There are producers that have special structures called chloroplast, which captures energy from the sun. This process is called photosynthesis. Some protists must get their food from the environment. These protists are called heterotrophs, organisms that cannot make their own food. Some are decomposers. Decomposers get energy by breaking down dead organic matter. Some protists are parasites. Parasites invades other organisms to get the nutrients that it needs.
Producing more protists. Like all living things, protists reproduce. Protists reproduce in several ways. Some protists reproduce asexually, and some reproduce sexually. Some protists even reproduce asexually at one stage in their life cycle and sexually at another stage. Asexual reproduction. Most protists reproduce asexually. In asexual reproduction, the offspring come from just one parent. These offspring are identical to the parent. In binary fission, a single-celled protist divides into 2 cells. In some cases, single-celled protists use multiple fission to make more than 2 offspring from one parent. Each new cell is a single-celled protist. Sexual reproduction. Some protists can reproduce sexually. Sexual reproduction requires 2 parents. Members of the genus Paramecium, sometimes reproduce sexually by a process called conjugation. During conjugation, 2 individuals join together and exchange genetic material by using a small, second nucleus. Then, they divide to produce 4 protists that have new combinations of genetic material. Page 51. Some protists have complex reproductive cycles. These protists may change forms many times. Figure 5 shows the life cycle of Plasmodium vivax. Plasmodium vivax, the protist that causes the disease malaria. P. vivax depends on both humans and mosquitoes to reproduce.
Protists reproduce 3 different ways. Most protists reproduce asexually. Binary fission. When a single-celled protist divides into two cells, some use multiple fission to make more than two offspring from one parent. Some reproduce sexually. Paramecium sometimes reproduce by a process called conjugation. During conjugation, two individuals join together and exchange genetic material. Some protists use as humans and mosquitoes to reproduce, as illustrated above. That concludes section 1 on protists. Kinds of protists. After reading this section, students must be able to describe how protists can be organized into 3 groups based on their shared traits. List an example of each group of protist.
Would you believe that there is an organism that lives in the forest and looks like a pile of scrambled eggs? This organism exists, and it's a protist. Slimy masses of protists can look like spilled food. Smears of protists on the walls of a fish tank may look like dirt. Few of the many kinds of protists look alike. These unique organisms are hard to classify. Scientists are always learning more about protist relationships. So, organizing protists into groups is not easy. One way that protists are grouped is based on shared traits. Using this method, scientists can place protists into 3 groups: producers, heterotrophs that can move, and heterotrophs that can't move. These groups do not show how protists are related to each other, but these groups do help us understand how protists can differ.
One way that protists are grouped is based on shared traits. Scientists can place protists in 3 different groups: producers, heterotrophs that can move, and heterotrophs that can't move.
Red algae. Most of the world's seaweeds are red algae. Most red algae live in tropical oceans, attached to rocks or to other algae. Red algae are usually less than 1 meter in length. Their cells contain chlorophyll, but a red pigment gives them their color. Their red pigment allows them to absorb the light that filters deep into the clear water of the tropics. Red algae can grow as deep as 260 meters below the surface of the water. Green algae. The green algae are the most diverse group of protist producers. They are green because chlorophyll is the main pigment in their cells. Most live in water or moist soil, but others live in melting snow, on tree trunks, and inside other organisms. Many green algae are single-celled organisms. Others are made of many cells. These many-celled species may grow to be 8 meters long. Individual cells of some species of green algae live in groups called colonies. Brown algae. Most of the seaweeds found in cool climates are brown algae. They attach to rocks or form large floating beds in ocean waters. Brown algae have chlorophyll and a yellow-brown pigment. Many are very large. Some grow 60 m as long as about 20 cars in just one season. Only the tops of these gigantic algae are exposed to sunlight. These parts of the algae make food through photosynthesis. This food is transported to parts of the algae that are too deep in the water to receive sunlight. Diatoms. Diatoms, diatoms, are single-celled. They are found in both salt water and fresh water. Diatoms get their energy from photosynthesis. They make up a large percentage of phytoplankton. Figure 4 shows some diatoms' many unusual shapes. The cell walls of diatoms contain a glass-like substance called silica. The cells of diatoms are enclosed in a 2-part shell. Dinoflagellates. Most dinoflagellates, are single-celled. Most live in salt water, but a few species live in fresh water. Some dinoflagellates even live in snow. Dinoflagellates have 2 whip-like strands called flagella, singular, flagellum. The beating of these flagella causes the cells to spin through the water. Most dinoflagellates get their energy from photosynthesis, but a few are consumers, decomposers, or parasites. Euglenoids. Euglenoides, are single-celled protists. Most euglenoids live in fresh water. They use their flagella to move through the water. Many euglenoids are producers and so make their own food. But when there is not enough light to make food, these euglenoids can get food as heterotrophs. Other euglenoids do not contain chlorophyll and cannot make food. These euglenoids are full-time consumers or decomposers. Because euglenoids can get food in several ways, they do not fit well into any one protist group.
Let's review protist producers. Algae have green pigment chlorophyll. Phytoplankton produces much of the world's oxygen. Green algae, most diverse producer, contain green chlorophyll throughout its cells. Brown algae, found in cool climates and are attached to rocks, have chlorophyll and a yellow-brown pigment. Diatoms have cell walls of diatoms that contain a glass-like substance called silica. Dinoflagellates have 2 whip-like strands called flagella. Euglenoids, producers and heterotrophs.
Heterotrophs that can move. Some heterotrophic protists have special traits that allow them to move. Other heterotrophic protists cannot move on their own. Those that can move are usually single-celled consumers or parasites. These mobile protists are sometimes called protozoans, protozoans, amoebas, and similar amoeba-like protists are soft, jelly-like protozoans. They are found in both fresh and salt water, in soil, and as parasites in animals. Although amoebas look shapeless, they are highly structured cells. Amoebas have contractile vacuoles to get rid of excess water. Many amoebas eat bacteria and small protists, but some amoebas are parasites that get food by invading other organisms. Certain parasitic amoebas live in human intestines and cause amoebic dysentery. Amoebic dysentery E. This painful disease causes internal bleeding. Amoebic movement. Amoebas and amoeba-like protists move with pseudopodia. Pseudopodia. Pseudopodia means false feet. To move, an amoeba stretches a pseudopod out from the cell. The cell then flows into the pseudopod. Amoebas and amoeba-like protists use pseudopodia to catch food. 2. When an amoeba senses a food source, it moves toward the food. The amoeba surrounds the food with its pseudopodia. This action forms a food vacuole. Enzymes move into the vacuole to digest the food, and the digested food passes into the amoeba. To get rid of wastes, an amoeba reverses the process. A waste-filled vacuole is moved to the edge of the cell and is released. Shelled amoeba-like protists. Not all amoeba-like protists look shapeless. Some have an outer shell. Radiolarian. Shells look like glass ornaments. Foraminiforans have snail-like shells. These protists move by poking pseudopodia out of pores in the shells. Zooflagellates. Zooflagellates are protists that wave flagella back and forth to move. Some zooflagellates live in water. Others live in the bodies of other organisms. Some zooflagellates are parasites that cause disease. The parasite Giardiolamblia, Zawrdiolamblia, can live in the digestive tract of many vertebrates. One form of G. lamblia lives part of its life in water. People who drink water infected with G. lamblia can get severe stomach cramps. Some zooflagellates live in mutualism with other organisms. In mutualism, one organism lives closely with another organism. Each organism helps the other live. The zooflagellate in Figure 9 lives in the gut of termites. This zooflagellate digests the cell walls of the wood that the termites eat. Both organisms benefit from the arrangement. The protist helps the termite digest wood. The termite gives the protist food and a place to live. Ciliates are complex protists. They have hundreds of tiny, hair-like structures known as cilia. The cilia move a protist forward by beating back and forth. Cilia can beat up to 60 times a second. Ciliates also use their cilia for feeding. The cilia sweep food toward the protist food passageway. The best-known genus of ciliates is Paramecium. The cell of a paramecium has two kinds of nuclei. A large nucleus called a macronucleus controls the functions of the cell. A smaller nucleus, the micronucleus, passes genes to another paramecium during sexual reproduction.
Let's review heterotrophs that can move. Amoebas soft jelly-like protozoans. They use pseudopodia to move about. Radiolarian amoeba have shells that look like glass ornaments. Foraminiforans amoeba have snail-like shells. Zooflagellates uses flagella that wave back and forth to move. Can also be parasitic. Ciliates hundreds of tiny hair-like structures known as cilia. Paramecium contain a large nucleus called a macronucleus that controls the function of the cell.
Heterotrophs that can move. Not all protist heterotrophs have features that help them move. Some of these protists are parasites that do not move about. Others can move only at certain phases in their life cycle. Spore-forming protists. Many spore-forming protists are parasites. They absorb nutrients from their hosts. They have no cilia or flagella, and they cannot move on their own. Spore-forming protists have complicated life cycles that usually include 2 or more hosts. For example, the spore-forming protist that causes malaria uses both mosquitoes and humans as hosts. Page 58. Water moles. Water moles are also heterotrophic protists that can move. Most water moles are small, single-celled organisms. Water moles live in water, moist soil, or other organisms. Some of them are decomposers and thus eat dead matter, but many are parasites. Their hosts can be living plants, animals, algae, or fungi. Slime molds. Slime molds are heterotrophic protists that can move only at certain phases of their life cycle. They look like thin, colorful, shapeless globs of slime. Slime molds live in cool, moist places in the woods. They use pseudopodia to move and to eat bacteria and yeast. They also decompose small bits of rotting organic matter by surrounding small pieces of the matter and then digesting them. Some slime molds live as a giant cell that has many nuclei and a single cytoplasm at one stage of life. As long as food and water are available, the cell will continue to grow. One cell may be more than 1 meter across. Other slime molds live as single-celled individuals that can come together as a group when food or water is hard to find. When environmental conditions are stressful, slime molds grow stalk-like structures with rounded knobs at the top. The knobs contain spores. Spores are small reproductive cells covered by a thick cell wall. The spores can survive for a long time without water or nutrients. As spores, slime molds cannot move. When conditions improve, the spores will develop into new slime molds.
That concludes the section on kinds of protist.